Have you ever taken a massive, incredibly detailed photo on a pro camera and wondered how it somehow magically turns into a tiny file that zips to your smartphone in a literal fraction of a second? And the crazy part, it stays looking practically identical even after we've tossed out a massive amount of its data. Honestly, it feels like pure magic, but you know what? It's not. It's just brilliant, unseen mathematics working behind the scenes. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the exact algorithms that let us stash billions of photos right in our pockets without ever running out of space. Think about a raw, completely uncompressed image weighing in at a super heavy 46 megabytes. Now, imagine taking that exact same image and compressing it down into a standard JPEG that's just 4.1 megabytes. I mean, that is less than 10% of its original size. It is a massive difference, and it perfectly illustrates the real-world power of the JPEG algorithm. It literally takes this huge, heavy boulder of digital data and crushes it down into a tiny, lightweight pebble in the blink of an eye. So the obvious question we have to ask here is how in the world does the picture still look the exact same when 90% of the original data is just gone? Think about it. If you took a book and ripped out 90% of the pages, the story wouldn't make any sense at all, right? Yet, with a compressed photograph, our brains don't even register that a single thing is missing. Well, this incredible reduction is completely thanks to mathematics that perfectly exploits human biology. Here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. 1. Why photos are heavy. 2. Hacking the human eye. 3. Converting pixels into waves. 4. The magic of quantization. 5. Why artifacts appear. And 6. Math that changed the world. All right, let's jump right into part 1. Why photos are so heavy to begin with. The burden of raw pixels. Okay, so every digital photo you ever take is essentially just a massive grid of tiny little building blocks, and we call those pixels. Each one of these individual pixels holds 3 separate channels of color information: red, green, and blue. And the camera assigns a specific value from 0 to 255 for every single one of them. Now, think about your modern 12-megapixel smartphone camera. Every time you hear that shutter click, it's instantly generating 12 million of these complex pixels. As you can guess, that data adds up incredibly fast. To really put that into perspective, just one single high-quality raw image can easily demand 80 million bits of data just to perfectly record all those red, green, and blue values. If we had to actually send 80 million bits every single time we took a quick selfie, it would literally crash our cellular networks and completely fill up your hard drive in a matter of days. We desperately needed a fix for this. Which brings us to part 2, hacking the human eye, the ultimate biological loophole. Deep inside the human eye, we have these fascinating little photoreceptor cells known as rods and cones. We have roughly 100 million rods, and these are incredibly sensitive to light intensity and brightness. But on the flip side, we only have about 6 million cones, which are the cells actually responsible for seeing color. What this means is that we are biologically hardwired to be super sensitive to changes in brightness, but we're honestly pretty terrible at noticing subtle, tiny changes in color. And this little biological quirk, it is the absolute foundation of JPEG compression. By using a really clever trick called chroma subsampling, the algorithm can safely throw out a massive chunk of that heavy color data while keeping all the brightness data totally untouched. Because of how our eyes physically work, you literally cannot see that the color information is missing, but the actual file size drops dramatically. It's totally brilliant. Let's move on to part 3, converting pixels into waves. This is the core math. The mathematics behind JPEG basically boils down to 3 major steps. We just talked about step 1, which is color subsampling, but steps 2 and 3 are where the really heavy mathematical lifting happens: the discrete cosine transform and quantization. To actually process the image, the algorithm doesn't just try to look at the whole giant picture all at once. That would be way too much data to crunch. Instead, it systematically slices the image into tiny, super manageable grids of 8 by 8 pixel blocks. So that's 64 pixels per block, and then the algorithm applies its intense mathematical formulas to these little squares individually millions of times over. Once the image is divided up, those blocks undergo what's called the Discrete Cosine Transform, or DCT for short. The easiest way to think about DCT is to picture a prism.
Just like a glass prism separates a single beam of white light into all those different frequencies of rainbow colors, DCT takes a static grid of pixels and separates it into 64 different wave frequencies. Basically, it mathematically untangles the big, smooth, sweeping shapes from the really sharp, high-frequency, fine details.
Next up is part 4, the magic of quantization, which is really the illusion of deletion. So, once DCT has neatly organized our image block into these wave frequencies, quantization steps right in. It takes these really complex frequency numbers and divides them down using a very specific table, ultimately rounding them off to the nearest whole number. Remember how we said high-frequency details are harder for our eyes to naturally focus on? Well, the algorithm knows this, so it aggressively rounds those specific, complicated numbers down. Complex, high-frequency details, like, say, the tiny texture of a single blade of grass, or the individual leaves on a tree, are mathematically rounded entirely to 0. So the block just becomes filled with identical numbers and a whole bunch of zeros. And right here, this is the ultimate secret of data compression. Storing a long string of 50 zeros takes almost 0 digital space. Tossing out these high-frequency details is the lossy part of a JPEG, and it's exactly what shrinks the file so drastically. All right, part 5, why JPEG artifacts appear. This is the breaking point.
You've probably seen this happen. When you try to push the compression way too far, say forcing a 6.3 megabyte file all the way down to just 652 kilobytes, the image starts to visibly fall apart. When you overcompress a JPEG, that quantization step we just talked about becomes way too aggressive. It basically rounds away so much mathematical data that the algorithm completely loses the ability to accurately rebuild those original 8x8 pixel blocks.
And when the math breaks down, that's exactly when we get those ugly visual glitches called compression artifacts. Blocking happens when you can literally see those tiny 8x8 squares becoming completely detached from each other. Then there's ringing, which leaves these ghostly, smudged outlines around sharp edges. And finally, blurring is when you get a total loss of fine texture, simply because all those delicate high-frequency waves were too aggressively turned into zeros.
Which brings us to our final section, part 6. Math that changed the world.
Seriously, try to imagine our modern world without JPEG compression. It would be a total nightmare. The internet would be painfully slow, constantly bogged down trying to load massive files. The storage on your brand new phone would fill up instantly. And social media, it simply couldn't exist the way it does today. Right now, roughly 86% of all images online use the JPEG format. It is literally the invisible mathematical backbone of global digital communication. So the next time you shoot a text, I want you to remember this. Every single time you send a photo to a friend, complex mathematics is working incredibly hard behind the scenes. It's slicing up the image, transforming static pixels into dynamic waves, quantizing complex data down into zeros, and literally hacking the biology of your own eyes, all just to make that heavy digital weight feel perfectly lightweight. If you want to keep exploring and really understand how mathematics completely rules the technology right in our hands, make sure you subscribe to the Code of the Universe channel. We absolutely love breaking down these unseen engines that power our reality. And I'll leave you with this one final thought today. If a simple grid of math can literally shrink the entire visual world to fit right into your pocket without you even noticing, what other unseen algorithms are out there, quietly compressing, filtering, and shaping the rest of your digital life? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the math behind the magic.